There are angels hovering round. There are angels hovering round. There are angels, angels hovering round.
Brattleboro Area Hospice was founded in 1979, and it's one of the only, the few volunteer hospices left in the United States. I think what's important about us is that we're really volunteer driven. Volunteers are crucial to what we do, and it's wonderful because it's neighbors helping neighbors, but it's also wonderful because it's very efficient. When you have, say, one care coordinator placing 90 volunteers, you know, that you're only funding one coordinator, and you've got 90, you know, potentially kind of 90 people out in the field doing a lot of this work.
Can't say enough about the volunteers. It's a wonderful group of people, and I've always considered it a real benefit to working here is to have the opportunity to connect with these folks.
Well, my name is Lee Stuckey. We moved, though we had been coming up here for quite a long time. In the summers, we moved to Brattleboro in 1994, and I got involved with hospice, taking the training in 1995.
My name is Tim Coles, and I went through the training with hospice 16 years ago because I was scared to death of death.
When I first got started in 1998, it was not too long after my son had died with AIDS.
My first connection with hospice was probably in the mid-'80s. I was working with the AIDS Project, and I was doing volunteer trainings. That was the job I had. And hospice was doing volunteer training, so we sort of would, you know, talk to each other about what should be a part of whatever we were doing, because they were like 8 weeks long. And then we would send someone to hospices, and they would talk about living with HIV, and hospice would send someone to the AIDS Project and talk about grief and dying.
I took the training, I think, in the fall of 1985. The training was held at Vera Dio's house, who was one of the founders of hospice. And Eli Dacre and Pam Mayer were the two leaders of the group, and Dr. Orr and Larry Crockett gave some of the lectures. So I had all of the early people.
I started with hospice, I probably got involved with hospice maybe 5 years ago, and I came to work with hospice after the death of my mother. And then I felt like I wanted to give back. I was so taken by all the help that was given to me and how much it meant to me and how much it really helped me that I wanted to give back.
There's a 33-hour training that hospice care volunteers go through. A lot of the training is experiential, which I think is of great benefit to give you a greater sense of finding out what mortality is for you and how you react in that kind of a situation.
So I took the volunteer training with Bettina, and that was very rewarding, and again, you know, covering difficult situations, but it was really good.
It was an absolutely eye-opening experience. It was very well done, and of course it dealt with this whole fear in our culture of death.
The training kind of arcs in the way that working with a client works. It's awkward at the beginning. It's kind of new. Are these people going to like me? Do I know what I'm getting into? How will this be?
You finish your training and they ask you questions about what kinds of situations you'd be willing to be involved in, and whether you're willing to cook or do gardening, or how you feel about dogs. And I said I'm fine with all of that. So I went out to a client who was some distance out of Brattleboro for the first visit, and I got there out in the country and was greeted by, maybe not greeted by, but by all five, but there were 5 Rottweilers and a beaver. A beagle, not a beaver, a beagle. So I thought, so much for saying I didn't mind dogs. Wonderful, wonderful relationship that went on for well over a year. And I actually, the dogs and I became good friends.
And in the middle there comes this just appreciation of one another, and this kind of thing that grows out, and people come and enjoy seeing one another, and they want that time. And then as it gets towards the end, people don't want to let go, just the way that we get close to the clients that we see.
A client back, I think it was about 5 years ago, but he also wanted really badly to go up and see my nativity collection, so his wife and daughter brought him up. He was feeling a little better, and he looked at it and he heard me say that I really needed a bigger building. So the next week when I went to visit him, he asked me how they were doing on the building, and I said, I had to think for a minute, and I finally decided to go along with him, and I said, they're doing great. They've got started and they're doing a good job. And so every week for quite a few months he'd ask me, and I kept going along with him. And then I got a little nervous because he was living longer than we thought, and I thought, I hope he doesn't want to go see the building. And so then he didn't say anything for probably 3 or 4 or 5 months. And then the week before he died, I was sitting holding his hand, and he had just talked with people to make sure his wife was going to be taken care of. And he looked at me and he said, now, did they finish the building? And I had to think for a few minutes, and I said, oh yes, and it's beautiful. And then he hesitated because he was really weak, and he said, now, were the workers satisfied with their pay? And I said, yes, they were very happy with what they got, and we were all happy with the result. And he looked at me and gave me the biggest smile I'll never forget. And then a few days later is when he died.
We have a lot of active volunteers and are always looking for more, and they're as different and varied as all of we humans are. They bring different kinds of sensitivities and personalities and gifts.
10 years after we were founded, the hospices had started to see in the 80s that grief was a huge component of what families were dealing with prior to the death and also after. So a lot of bereavement programs started to spring up with the hospices. So in the early 90s, this hospice started a bereavement program, which has really expanded. We've had the executive director of the Hospice Council of Vermont say we have the biggest bereavement program in the state of Vermont.
I'm Elizabeth Pittman. I'm the bereavement care coordinator at Brattleboro Area Hospice. It'll be 16 years. We offer a variety of bereavement services at this point, not only to our hospice family members, but being from a small community without other grief support services per se, anybody who's had a death loss in the community can avail themselves of our support groups. Our bereavement volunteers can be on a mailing list, letting them know that no, this is not hugely out of the ordinary. this is in fact normal for grieving. Things have been really turned topsy-turvy in your life, and it's very disorienting to be grieving.
For the last year plus, I've been facilitating a group for people who have lost young adult children. People who arrive at the group almost frozen because it's been a recent death and the shock is so great, and then the people who are there just respond in such a knowledgeable way that the next week the person's a little less frozen, and the third week they're even less frozen, and you can see who they really are, and they're on the path.
What's great about our organization is that we kind of we can see a need and we can react pretty quickly. And the reason we can react quickly is that we don't get any state or federal funding, and we don't get any health insurance money. So all of the money that runs our organization comes from Windham County, comes from our local community. About 65% of it is from our thrift store, Experience Goods.
I've been involved with hospice for over 20 years, and I helped start the original hospice shop with Allison McCrae and Chris, my wife.
Hi, my name is Chris McDermott, and I'm co-president with Penfield of the board. When I moved to Brattleboro in 1986, I called hospice and got put on the fundraising committee by choice and met Allison McCrae, who's in the back. And she had a wonderful idea about starting a thrift store.
I'm Allison McCrae.
And you started this whole concept, right?
I did, with my friend Chris, yeah. Well, the interesting thing is that part of it is the original, where we started, the original one in the Harmony parking lot end of the building. And we were just in a tiny little bit to start out with. So it's kind of nice that it's come full circle and it's come back again.
Melissa Hayes, and I am the bereavement volunteer coordinator. Been associated with hospice for a while as a hospice care volunteer and an administrative volunteer, and worked a little in the original shop down in the basement right in this very building, steaming clothes. I train volunteers and assign them to bereavement clients and support them in assignments that they have.
Liza King, and I managed Experience Goods, the hospice shop, from January 1990 through September 2002. And I took over from Allison, who was also very much supported by Chris McDermott and Stuart McDermott.
One of the things that I'm here to tell you about, besides to say thank you, is that we are once again on the edge of taking another step. So we're about to open another store in the community. We're going to be expanding, in addition to the space we have now, which is about 7,000 feet on Flag Street. We are going to be going back in history and revisiting our old space on Elliott Street. We are, yes, so get the lights ready, they're coming back in.
To the board, which was about 8 weeks ago. It took us about 2 weeks to get permission to get the building going, and so in 6 weeks we've pretty much transformed the space, and it's been fun. We've had a wonderful support team, and I'll be glad haven't been done, but it's very exciting.
I'm Karen Zamoyski, and I'm the new store manager at Experience Goods Homes Furnishings, and I would just like to thank Hospice, the organization, and the many volunteers and employees, staff that have supported this effort.
Some other things we do in the community is we have a community altar for Dia de los Muertos, which is a Mexican holiday that celebrates people who have died and you want to honor them. We have the altar at our thrift store, and people bring in pictures and poems and favorite things such as their favorite food and lay it at the altar. It's a unique way for people to kind of honor someone they loved in community and public.
Leo, and I am the coordinator, founder, spiritual director of Hallowell. Hallowell is a bedside singing group that we started about 7 years ago when a very beloved woman in our community, Dinah Brunig, was dying and asked for some singing at her bedside. So a group got organized from community, from Guilford Church, and I happened to be Dinah's hospice volunteer at the time, which was a great honor and privilege. So we sang for her 2 nights in her last week of life. And lo and behold, hospice called me up and said, can we do this as something that we offer the community? And so 7 years later, Dinah's legacy goes on, and we're called to bedsides to sing for hospice clients all over Brattleboro and the surrounding areas. Tonight we're going to be singing at the altar for the Day of the Dead here at the new Hospice Thrift Shop on Elliott Street. We're really excited to do this.
When the wicked carry us away, captivity require of us a song. How can we sing our holy song in a strange land?
My name's Peter Amadon, and I'm originally it was my relationship as the choir director of the Guilford Community Church. And we always would sing for people who were in bed or who were sick or dying, and we sang for Dinah Brunig. So when she was in her final days, I gathered a group of people together to sing for her, and Kathy Leo, who was her caretaker, was there, and thought, what a wonderful thing, wonderful thing to have a singing community. Wouldn't it be great if we could provide that to people who are passing over who don't have a singing community? And thus was born the idea of our hospice singing group, which we named Hallowell.
How can we sing our holy song in a strange land? So let the
I'm Jamie Eckley. Actually, I got into it because my neighbor Kathy Leo was a great care provider when my wife was dying up on the hill, and when Hallowell got going, I joined in. It seemed like a good thing to do.
Let's do this like a hospice thing, just that it's quiet and blending, but not too slow. No.
Singing at bedsides is a really profound, powerful thing for me.
He abides with us forever.
And we also have a beautiful garden at Living Memorial Park. The land is the town of Brattleboro's, and they've been incredibly supportive over the years, allowing us to grow the garden. My father passed away 3 years ago, so we went and bought some mums, and went to the garden. It was a glorious fall afternoon, and my nieces and nephews kind of got down in the dirt and dug a hole and planted the mum, and my family, none of which had been to the garden before, were just really overwhelmed with how beautiful it was, and with the markers that people had made, and they are laid out along the stone wall, and also the fluttering prayer flags, which are kind of remembrance flags for people that are hanging above on the bow. Everybody was just kind of like looking at it and just felt that it was a really beautiful place to remember someone you love. So it made me even more grateful to have helped with the garden being possible, and to be able to offer it to my family as an alternative.
There are about 6 of us, I guess, and we decided we would meet, and I guess we met every Friday afternoon. Then we started putting together the training program, and I think Viradeo was the first place that we had a training, and a lot of my very dearest friends in Brattleboro were in that first class. To the New Jerusalem. Anyway, that's how we began, and I remember our first patient was, we were simply thrilled to have a patient, and kind of overwhelmed her. And, she just refused to die because she was having such a good time, and we had round-the-clock serving this lady, and she had never had much attention in her life, and all of a sudden she had a great deal of attention, literally day and night, and she did not want to let that go. So that kind of taught us a lesson, I guess, and we became a little more clear about what we could and could not offer. We're on our journey home.